Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my next interview was a whole lot of fun. Collin Friesen and I were able to, we got together online. He was somewhere, I think, in Santa Barbara. He pulled over his car, and we had a fun, interesting, and I think a kind of a meaningful conversation. I can already hear Collin rolling his eyes as I say that, but I really do think it was a meaningful conversation about his new film, Sorry for Your Loss, written and directed by Collin, and starring Bruce Greenwood and a few others that you're going to recognize for sure. In fact, quite a cast. This is a film, obviously, Sorry for Your Loss. It's about death. It's about working through a midlife crisis. It's about not, on one hand, it's about not taking life too seriously. It seems to me, on another hand, it's sort of a comment on the fact that we don't take moments in life seriously enough. It's about craft. We get into writing. We talk about the film business. We talk about societal norms and why Collin pushes back against those and why he does that not only through his writing and through his characters, but probably why he does that as well in the real world. And we and really probably most importantly, we do in fact talk about why he is the best Mennonite screenwriter in LA. You're going to want to find out why that's important, and you are going to want to find out why you should never judge a book by its cover. And here's the key moment, and again, we've got Collin rolling his eyes, why the key is in your future. And I say that kind of with a little bit of a sarcastic tone, but we really do dive in. Sorry for Your Loss. It's coming soon to a theater near you. Actually, it's on iTunes. You can get it there. Going to be available on Crave soon, video on demand. Check it out. A lot of fun. Sorry for Your Loss with Collin Friesen coming right up. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my writing and my public speaking. You can buy my book, Real Change is Incremental, there through Amazon. And if you want to get behind Face to Face and support us on a monthly basis, you can do that through Patreon. And if you can't do that, leave us a review, please. iTunes or on Spotify. Tell your friends about Face to Face. Forward on our monthly newsletters. Sign up for our newsletter. Might be actually a really good first start. We're coming up on over 450 interviews with a whole lot of interesting fun. A whole lot of interesting and fun people doing some pretty amazing things. And don't forget, you can advertise on Face to Face as well. Banner ads on the site. We've got a great social media following now. We are getting, we're growing all the time. And if you want to advertise actually on the podcast itself, we can certainly do that as well. And of course, I appear on rabble.ca, a place where you can find other writers and podcasters and people that are going a little deeper on the things that matter. Stay tuned. Coming right up, Collin Friesen and Sorry for Your Loss. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by a very special guest with us here today. We have Collin Friesen on the line to talk about a whole host of things, I would imagine, but really we're going to be focusing on a new film from Collin called Sorry for Your Loss. Collin, thanks for your time today.
I was happy to pull over in the shadow of an AutoZone to talk to you for as long as you want to talk to me.
And you're sitting in a parking lot somewhere in LA or somewhere in California, right?
Halfway between Palm Springs and Los Angeles. It's a lovely part of the world. It is strip malls for as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, no doubt. Is there a... I was going to say, is there a Golden Griddle nearby? But that's a pretty Canadian franchise. What's the
I bet you $20 I could hit a Hooters from here if I really put my mind to it.
Perfect. It's what I'm striving for, and So here's
go big or go home.
Go big or go home. Thanks for your time today, Collin. I really appreciate it. So hey, tell me something. Your Twitter handle, is it true? Are you really the best Canadian Mennonite screenwriter living in LA?
You would kind of think so, right? I mean, have you heard of another one who's any better than I am? It's what Howard Stern did many years ago when he claimed to be the king of all media, and no one said, no, that's crazy or not. They're just like, oh, okay, I guess you're going to be. So here's the thing about living in the States. You learn to take things. That lovely Canadian deference and politeness gets beaten out of you in about 5 years, and then you just start being this rabid self-promoter and saying things and doing things and just desperately trying to get attention.
Oh, that's hilarious. Did you just pretty much describe about 80% of Hollywood?
Well, probably 90, but 10% are in denial.
Yeah, I guess. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your history. Obviously every time I have the pleasure of interviewing somebody, I try to do a tiny bit of research, with other films, are there other connections, etc. How, pray tell, do you go from, I guess, Winnipeg, one of many Mennonites from Winnipeg, and wind up writing movies, writing screenplays, teleplays. I guess Schitt's Creek in your background. That's pretty cool. I'd love to hear more about that as well. But yeah, how do you go from there to Sorry for Your Loss?
I started off by I was brought up in a not overtly religious but very socially conscious home. And the idea was always that I should do something with my life that, improve the human experience, I guess. And so I decided to become a journalist because, that seemed logical and I could help people and tell stories and that sort of thing. I was a pretty crappy journalist, as it turned out. I had no stomach for, knocking on the doors of, families who had recently lost someone. But I sort of stumbled around in that career for a little while and made it out to Lethbridge, Alberta, the other LA, as it turns out, where I made the decision that I was either going to get my master's degree in journalism or go to film school. So I applied to 2 different schools and was accepted in both. And I thought, Los Angeles, let's see if I can put my modest skills to work down here. So I came down. I managed to stick around. I sold the first movie I wrote, which was called The Big White, which was eventually made with Robin Williams and Holly Hunter in it. And after that, it's like, well, when you sell your first movie, you think you're on your way to Easy Street because they give you a check with many, many, many zeros in it. And what you don't realize is there's a pretty good chance you're going to end up in what we call movie jail, which is the movie comes out, it doesn't do well, no one wants to talk to you, no one wants to hire you. You are basically in exile, internal exile, I guess you might call it, for as many years as that happens. And that's kind of what happened to me, but I managed to stick it out and living in LA, and I finally decided I was going to try directing one of my own pieces. I had done some short films. I did a short film called Farm Sluts with Fox Searchlight, which was a program they developed to look for young and up-and-coming directors. I was neither young nor up-and-coming, but somehow I managed to worm my way into the program.
Do you think Lethbridge, Alberta had anything to do with that?
I wasn't run out of town per se, but I did a documentary for the CBC while I was working there about the very first all-Christian TV station. And it was very much, they would just rebroadcast this horrific diatribal, if that's a word, anti-gay, anti-woman stuff from deep in the States. And, I pointed out that this probably runs in contravention of their CRTC license.
Right.
And right after I did the documentary, I was accepted to film school. So I thought, hey, why don't I just go? So I just left town. And I'm sure they thought that I had been, run out of town on a rail.
And now you find yourself making films, writing scripts. And tell me also, before we had the record button on here today, you were at the AFI yesterday on a panel, waxing poetic, no doubt.
Yeah, they brought me in because they're always. I talked to their foreign students, or I was talking to their foreign students about getting an O1 visa and finding ways to stay in America legally if you want to work in the film business. And it was really fascinating. Some lovely other people on the panel, but oh my God, they go on and on and on. And I was just like, make your point and stop talking.
Right.
Just say what you have to say. Generally, I try to get a laugh and then, okay, now I know I'm done. You always go out on that kind of thing. But as we were talking about before, that's also some of the best screenwriting advice I've ever gotten. You know, if your scene starts as late as humanly possible, and as soon as your scene has done what it is set out to accomplish, that's when your scene is over, and that's when you move on to the next scene. So I guess screenwriting has informed my life, and my life has informed my screenwriting.
Interesting. What do you take away from film school? I mean, was that the right call for you? Should you have just packed a bag and gone to LA before film school, or like is it
Well,
theory and practice? Is it a bit of both coming together? What's your take on it today?
at the time, there wasn't the glut of information about how to make movies that you can find right now on the internet.
Right.
And I would say if you're going to blow $80,000 over 2 years, go online, read some books, read some magazines, teach yourself, and go out and make your first feature. You will learn as much doing that as if you had gone to film school. For me, it was the right call because it also allowed me to get to LA. It allowed me to work here legally for a year. It allowed me to get my O1 visa. Because the thing about the Canadian film system is the Canadian film system is not a healthy animal. You know? And for a kid from the prairies at that point to try and break in and go, I want to do movies, I want to do TV, like it would never have happened for me. And say what you will about the United States, but it is much more of a meritocracy, I think, than Canada is. You know, talent will out. And if you're good at what you do, you will eventually be found because there are so many different ways to find you. I think in Canada, for the most part, it's not quite the old boy system it used to be, but man, it's a cliquey kind of business when you get right down to it.
So really sort of comes down to who you know. Is that
Well, I think you have to live in Toronto or you have to live in Vancouver and you have to have wormed your way into that particular thing. But like, take our film Sorry for Your Loss. It was a modestly budgeted independent comedy, right? A little dark, kind of funny. The reviews, I think, have been reasonably positive. It seems like the kind of thing that, if the Toronto International Film Festival had picked it up, we would have been amplified. It's a Canadian movie. It's made with 90% Canadian talent. But they looked at it and said, yeah, no, it's really funny, but it's just not the kind of movie we program. And I'm like, okay, I get it. So are we just going to do Canadian movies that are so on the fringe of different things that's the only thing that's going to come out of Canada, and they're going to have a really limited audience, and they're really going to have a really limited, possibility of actually making their money back? Or is there a point at which we kind of have to go, okay, maybe a little mainstream filmmaking is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. And maybe if we do that, we can build up the Canadian industry so that Canadian movies can actually make money. Because Canadian movies just don't make money.
Yeah, it's such a challenging industry. It really is. What little I know of it, and I'm dipping my foot in the pool here and there with interviews, and I'm actually kind of currently working on a small documentary myself and learning way more about the industry than I think I kind of wanted to know. Let's a little shout out. I hear is the film actually Sorry for Your Loss? Is it going to be on Crave? Is that right, or you're still sort?
Yeah, it should be on Crave if it's not on Crave already. It will also be video on demand. It was on Showtime down in the States, which is nice, and it was on the Movie Channel down here. We also, Fox International picked up the international distribution for it. So, there were people who saw some merit in it. So that gave me a nice feeling.
Yeah, no,
that's the other thing. Yeah. When you're a young boy and you want to work in the movies, it's like, I want to go to the States. I don't care about success in Canada. I just want to make it down there. And then all of a sudden you're rejected in your home country. You're like, well, what the hell, man? Come on.
Right.
I did all this to be loved back home. What's wrong with you?
Even the Canadians don't want me.
I know.
So let's talk about the film. Congratulations. I got a huge amount of time and admiration and respect for anyone who finishes gets the job done. I mean, you got a great cast. It's a fun film. There's some great comedic moments in it. Can you talk a little bit about Sorry for Your Loss? So clearly it's a road movie of sorts, and it's a road movie with a bag of ashes attached to it.
Yeah, it's the 5 second pitches. It's a young man, a new father who's very much estranged from his dad. Finds out his father has died. He goes home for the funeral and learns that in order to collect his decent, if somewhat modest inheritance, he has to fulfill his father's final wishes and sprinkle his ashes on the field of his favorite sports team, which in our case, and how Canadian is this, was the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I
That's
mean,
right.
come on.
It's pretty
So yeah,
Winnipeg.
so he is tasked with doing that, and he hooks up with his dad's former best friend, played by Bruce Greenwood, who is a Canadian treasure, and hijinks ensue. What can I say?
So where does a story like that come from? And I think it's taking us to a question I want to ask you about, writing over directing and not maybe the tension between the two, but how you've handled them and how and where you're hoping your career is going to go. Is it more about writing?
Mm,
Do you want to sort of start directing more? Did you enjoy that experience? Let's get into that in a second. But I love
sure.
the so there's some the you strike me like somebody who has quite an irreverent side to you, and I'm kind of interested in that, and where that came from. Is that dark guilt coming out of your Mennonite background? Is that where that's all coming from?
Wow. Wow. I don't know where the darkness comes from, like the dark sense of humor. I've always found things that shouldn't be funny, funny. So
Right.
it's like death. Yeah, let's do death. That'll be absolutely terrific. I, I'm sure my therapist, if I had one, and maybe I need one again, would be able to plumb the depths of that. It's just, I'm a huge fan of irreverence, and I'm a big fan of sticking your thumb in the eye of
Mm.
whatever societal norms are, be they government, church, or current culture things. So maybe that's where it all comes from. I don't know. I like weird stuff. What can I say?
What kind of music did you listen to as a kid? I mean, are we talking about
First
KMFDM?
album, Rush, Fly By Night. First album, vinyl, Rush, Fly By Night. And then, thanks to CanCon, a lot of CanCon.
Right.
And, I had 10 albums growing up, 20 original hits, 20 original stars. I used to love those. But I was never a big music guy.
Well, the
That
reason
was sort of a jam.
the reason I ask is, when you said push back against societal norms, my immediate thought went to, oh, he's a skateboarder. He was,
Oh, God.
little KMFDM, little Depeche Mode, little Sex Pistols, Agent Orange,
Oh, my.
Dead Kennedys. That's what this is the kind of culture this guy grew up in.
No, I grew up in a pretty straight-laced, can't afford anything kind of culture. Couldn't afford a skateboard, couldn't afford,
Wow.
you
Okay.
know, a whole lot of albums. There wasn't money around to actually invent myself as a teenager. So I think it was, watching MASH in syndication every night for about 8 straight years until I had pretty much memorized every episode.
That's pretty interesting, eh?
Like I
Yes.
learned to write. I learned to write movies and TV by watching just a ton of movies and TV.
It's pretty interesting, I've interviewed writers before who have said similar things. They don't talk about, going taking English or majoring in history or anthropology to become a better writer. They talk about, what, I read books and I write. And
Yeah,
Stephen King in On Writing, I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a wonderful, wonderful read, and it's kind of autobiographical, and then he sort of gets into the actual business of writing, and he basically says, write a page every day and you'll have a book by the end of the year. Now, easier said than done, but there's something about that
yeah,
practice, right?
yep,
That discipline that gets you, hopefully, maybe not always, but to a better place, or at
yeah,
least a place where you've finished. I personally find writing very difficult. I find it challenging to sit down and say, okay, today I'm going to write a couple of pages or an essay on X. It's
right.
I find it pretty challenging. Isn't it a deep exercise in insecurity?
No, writing isn't, showing it to people is.
Right. Fair
That's when you
enough.
learn just how far you have yet to go. And I have, I've got a circle of people who look at my stuff, and one of my closest friends who's also a TV writer. He's the first one who looks at anything, and we have a rule, which is we have to find something horribly wrong in the first sentence of each other's works.
Funny.
It's just like, what the, giant X on the first page, and then you go, oh, okay, now I know what's coming. And it's sort of, it's that first, splash of cold water, so you know what ocean you will be swimming in and what it's going to
Right.
be like.
Right.
So, if you have a good friend who's willing to give you notes and bloody you, right, in that process, your work will be so much better, and you will be so in such better shape when it goes to someone whose opinion actually counts.
It's pretty interesting, I mean, you're talking about a critic that you can trust, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who can actually step into your work. You trust them. You know they have your best intentions at heart, and they're giving you honest feedback, honest, transparent, open, authentic feedback.
Yeah, and the more important thing is to give it to someone who knows what you're trying to accomplish.
Mm,
Because there are people who are like, well, I would have written it this way, and you generally say, well, yeah, but you're not writing this. I'm writing this.
right.
It's someone who understands your voice and your mechanics, because so much of it is craft. So much of it is, not the genius spark of inspiration, but making sure your paragraphs don't run on for too long, and
Right.
things of that nature.
What what would you say you? I mean, so I mean, for me, I mean, my background is philosophy. I've studied existentialism for years, so I have some people would probably say, oh, Peck has a little bit of a fascination with the melancholic, or not. They might not say death, but certainly the French and the German existentialists were kind of fascinated by
Sure.
death. Is that something
Yeah.
that came out for you in the writing, or when you go back and you watch or you reflect on it? I mean, I can't help but go to the caretaker at the stadium quoting, I had to look up who wrote the poem, but I knew it right away, Mary Elizabeth Fry, and I'm like, whoa,
Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
that was a pretty interesting turn from cracks about narcoleptic cows, which is hysterical, by the way, to poetry by Fry. So I'd love to hear your insight on that, if you have any.
I, it's interesting, and that to me is I take that as a compliment, just because I had no sense of that poem did not exist in my brain. The only thing I was trying to do in that moment was take a character who was somewhat deranged, and you think he's exactly this one kind of person, and give him a layer of depth that you're not expecting to come from him, and also hopefully inform our lead character on his journey. So our lunatic our lunatic janitor is actually a fairly well-read man who his life is books and all that sort of stuff, and you're like, whoa, where did this come from? And then in the scene, it's like, oh, and the poem's over. Oh, it's not over. Oh, it's still not over. And it's just that it if the scene is doing the work it's supposed to, you get the discomfort of your lead character trying to not offend this man because he needs his help, while at the same time wondering how long he's going to have to suffer through this, while at the same time, helping him along on his spiritual journey. So when you get a scene that's like that, you're like, oh, okay, I'm firing on all cylinders here, and generally it works out pretty well. Now, if you can have an entire movie of scenes like that, you're absolutely golden. It's really kind of tough.
Yeah, it's a great moment. I love the scene because it really did come out of nowhere, and those moments for me
Yeah.
are not only hysterical. You got that lovely sort of, like you say, that lunatic caretaker who's well read.
Yeah.
So you got this real
Stephen,
paradox.
yeah, yeah, Stephen McIntyre, a Winnipeg boy who's been in so many things and is just, that's kind of him. We didn't have to dress him up too much. He came to set like that.
How much you sound? I mentioned this to you before. You've got this sort of comedic beat, even in the interview, and I hope you take that as a compliment too. But I just, there's some great lines in the film, and they don't strike me as one-offs, but I just wonder, how many of those were sort of ad-libbed. Oh, here, why don't you say this instead of what's written? Like for instance, Buddy, one of my fave lines in the whole film, Buddy, all cliches are true. It's just science. Like, I mean, where,
Yeah.
it's what wonderful line.
No, that was written. There wasn't a ton of improvising that actually made it into the final film.
Interesting. Okay.
My lead actor decided that he was going to try to improvise pretty much everything, and then he would get back to the script, and I'm like, thank you very much for saying the words in the script, and now we'll move on. I'm sure we used some of his stuff, but well, the old line when you're a director is, when you have an actor who's insisting on sort of rewriting his own stuff, is, hey, try it the way it is in the script, and then we'll try it your way, and then when we get into editing, I'll pick the best one, and you'll have had a chance, and I'll have had a chance, and we'll go from there. Now, Samuel L. Jackson, that was put to him a while back, when he is notorious for just saying what he wants on set. And a director said it to him, and he said, screw you, except he didn't say screw you. He said, if you do that, you're just going to use yours all the time. If I only give you what I want you to have, that's all you're going to have, and I know it'll end up in the movie. So, directing is herding cats with a cattle prod. It's just, one thing running off in one direction after the other, and you just trying to keep it together. I compared it to surfing a tsunami wave. You're probably going to get up, and you're going to stay up, and you're not going to stay up till the end, right? You're going to get rolled.
Right.
And eventually the movie just sort of takes over, and it becomes its own animal, and you just hang on until the very end.
So Jeff, the main character near the end of the film, and I wonder if this is you just sort of, raging against the machine. There was another 80s band I should have mentioned when I was talking
There
about
you go.
skateboarding. When you talked about pushing back against societal norms, doesn't Jeff say something about, one of his friends says something like, I think they're on the phone, and he says, sorry for your loss, pause. Is that what I'm supposed to say? And Jeff's like, yeah, that's about what all people say. I mean, were you kind of riffing off your own experience at that point? Because I kind of smiled at that, but yet at the same time kind of went, ow, that hurts a little bit, because is that really the best we can do? Oh, I'm sorry for your loss.
That is what people say. My wife lost her father a little while ago, and a really good friend of mine lost his mom. And so I was sort of surrounded by dealing with people dealing with death, and it's like, I said, I don't know what to say, and it's like, you just say you're sorry for your loss, because there is nothing you can say. Nothing is going to make you feel better, and you don't want to try too hard in that moment, because you end up making it about you, and that's the worst thing. That's even worse than just being sort of throwing off these cliche kind of lines. But it's interesting. My wife's father, he was actually the inspiration for the dad in this movie, because many years ago we went to his house, and he had been divorced for many, many years, and I had never met him before. And we walked into his house, and in the living room of a split level bungalow, there was a TV, a recliner, a weight bench, and a drill press, and that was all. And I'm like,
the house
what
of
the
a serial
hell is
killer.
a drill press doing? Yeah, and that was it. And she was like, I don't know. He's been single for so long, it doesn't even matter anymore.
Oh, that's
so when I started
so
writing
funny.
this, I'm like, okay, what do men of a certain age end up accumulating? And, what do their lives look like when there's no one around to be in their life to sort of pull them towards a better version of society, I guess.
Well, and listen, I don't want to go too philosophical or existential on you. This is a comedy, but you know what? It's a dark comedy. I think great stories always have something to say about the human condition. And to me, this is a guy who didn't know his dad, whose dad had a drill press in his living room. What is going on with that? And where did those two? Where did that go sideways? And we get some of those indications, and we learn a little bit about him, about his past and his golf habits and his friend. The Bruce Greenwood's brilliant, by the way, in it. He's so much fun.
Yeah,
He's so
yeah,
much
he's so
fun to
good.
watch.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and for me, there was a sadness as well that was kind of underlying Jeff's character, even though he was dealing with it, through comedy and through sarcasm. This is a guy who still never
Yeah.
really got to know his dad.
Right. And the lesson at the end of the movie was you never will.
Right.
You think there's some magic answer for why you and your dad don't get along. Well, there may be reasons, but you're never going to know. And that was one of the things, that's kind of why I wanted to make this movie. It's like there was a version of the script way, way back where at the end of it all, he's like, oh, now I understand. He really did love me after all. And he just couldn't say it because he was a complicated man. And I looked at that and I'm like, no, that's just bullshit. Sorry, life is darker than that. People die. You don't know why they died. You don't know if they really cared about you. And you just have to move on and live the best life possible for you. Which is why at the end, when Justin and Bruce are having their final conversation, it's like you wanted to know about him. You know all you need to know about him. Just you have to be the better person. You shouldn't be like him. And sometimes that's the only lesson you get to take forward. So that was my profound. If it's a message movie, it's like the message is get over yourself.
Right. Get over
Which,
yourself.
by the way, is a very Canadian Mennonite thing. Like, oh, you hurt yourself? Walk it off. Oh, you lost an arm? Tuck it under the other arm and walk to the hospital.
Right.
Oh, or do you want to come home?
Yeah,
And that's why.
grow up,
there's
face the music.
Yeah, there's a line in there that Lolita Davidovich has about, I think it's my uncle lost his foot in a thresher once, never made a peep. Like that's the value, right? Oh, he's a good man because he didn't cry when he got a limb cut off. And so, you go, okay, if you're brought up in that sort of scenario, you get closed off. And it's like, how do you open yourself up?
How, as a writer, you've had quite a broad career, and I'd love to hear about what's coming up for you. But how do you, as a writer, maybe you don't. Where does autobiography come in? How much of your life, the drill press was right out of your life? Is that an easy question to answer, or not so much?
Everything comes out of your life. Every character you write is a version of yourself, as far as I'm concerned. You can do your best to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else, but at the end of the day, it's all coming out of your brain. So how could it be anyone else by that point?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Every character you write is a version of yourself. There's a philosophical notion to pursue, or at least, if not philosophical, psychological. That's for sure. Do you find writing therapeutic, Colin?
No. No. Writing is a job. It's just therapy. Fuck off. Pardon me.
Yeah, no.
Maybe it is for some people. I'm sorry. If it is, great. If you write in a journal, then great. But, this is a job, and your job is to be fun and creative and put something together that someone actually wants to look at. Someone will pay money for. That ain't therapy, man. No, absolutely not. Not for me.
Not for you. Do you think you might at some point look back and go, okay, now I see the therapeutic value in the writing that I did?
No, I'm gonna look back and go, oh yeah, that's where I was at that time.
Right. Yes.
Right? That's what I was thinking. Like the stuff I used to write and the stuff I write now is like, okay, I'm a little older, a little wiser, a little more cynical, a little more, wearing his heart on his sleeve. You can trace your evolution through the stuff that you put out there.
Yeah, you can see the intention of it. Well, what's interesting, you make the comment about cynical, and there's a dark edge to the film, but there's also, I think the film ultimately is rooted in relationship and rooted in family. I don't know if you agree with me on that or not, but
it's all about it's all about him being able to be a father to his son and being able for him to learn how to be a husband to his wife in this scenario where all the fun stuff he used to do is gone. Right. He's a dad, his wife is covered in puke, and they never have sex. And I'm not saying men are idiot beasts who only want to eat and bone, but men are idiot beasts who only want to eat and bone sometimes. So, and he's looking at his life going, holy crap, here I go. Why do I not feel this wonderful bond with my son? And then it kind of makes sense, hopefully, because, his father was a horrible father. So, he's worried about that. And I don't want to go too far down into that particular well, because that to me is boring, right? But, to have him go on this journey where someone who doesn't know that much about his dad really tries to find out. And the lesson at the end, as we said, is it's not all that important.
I love
the key isn't in the past. The key is in the future.
The key is in the future. There you go. That's the soundbite.
Oh,
yeah.
And by the way, no, that was a stupid thing to say. Just forget that. It's just really Friesen. Keep talking. Eventually, you say something idiotic.
That's funny. No, that's a line we could put on a T-shirt. I think we could sell it, and it would make us both rich beyond our wildest dreams. Colin,
it'll be the title of my film that gets into Tim.
I'm convinced of it. I love the opening scene to the film, by the way. The getting into who hasn't been there, who's in a family, who has a husband, wife, partner, family, whatever. You're standing in line, your arms are full, you just want to get home, and the phone call comes in. Hey, can you go and get me? X, Y, or Z. It was anyway, very, very funny moment. So Colin, tell me. Sadly, we're going to have to come. We're wrapping up here in a couple minutes. What's next for you? We barely talked about Bruce. We didn't even talk about Robin Williams. I'd love to hear about that too. But what's next?
There's always something else coming up. I'm currently adapting a comic book, which will hopefully turn into a TV series, which is really completely out of my wheelhouse. I wrote a show that IFC picked up, and then it's now with AMC Studios. So this is real inside baseball stuff. We're looking for a home for it. And I was doing something else. What the heck else was I doing? There's a comic book thing and that thing, and it'll come to me at some point.
You're also you're spending a fair bit of time on boring panels by the sounds of it.
I'm doing stuff for National Public Radio down here, which is always a certain amount of nerd cred in the circles I run in. So that's fun. I just did a piece about why faith-based movies are generally awful, which was fun to put together.
Oh,
and I'm just I've finished another spec script, as they say, which is one no one's paid for, and I kind of want to see if there's room to do that. It started off as a very traditional romantic comedy, and then I went, okay, how come I'm just putting cis het people in this thing? So now it's a bisexual woman and a lesbian woman and a horrible heterosexual man, and that's the love triangle. So I'm going to see if that'll work for me.
It's a pretty fascinating world to live in, it seems to me, and I really do wish you well with it. That whole just stepping into a whole world that's unknown as a writer. I think it's pretty cool, pretty fascinating, and I trust that you will continue to be known as, the best Canadian Mennonite screenwriter living in LA.
Look at you, taking a thing from the beginning and using it at the end. See, that's screenwriting 101 there. It's like, oh, yeah, the MacGuffin at the beginning is the thing that wasn't the thing at the end.
Tying up the loose ends, man. Because as we know, as Colin Friesen says, the key is in the future. Hey, man.
I'm going to keep my eye out if I hear you say that.
That's right. Really had a lot of fun chatting today. I appreciate your time. We've been talking to Collin Friesen, having some fun all the way from somewhere in some parking lot in California, talking to Collin Friesen about his new film, Sorry for Your Loss. Colin, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, man.
Thank you too, my friend. Best of luck, and hopefully we'll talk to you again when the next one comes in.
Absolutely. Thanks a bunch.